Welcome to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 139 with Nik Wood. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer and guide Derek Loudermilk. Head on over to derekloudermilk.com to check out the show notes for this episode and sign up for the Art of Adventure newsletter, which will get you the latest episodes, articles, and reading recommendations. I want to thank my patrons over on patreon.com for supporting the Art of Adventure, making the show possible. You can donate by going to patreon.com/Derek Loudermilk. I'd like to invite you to join me on Adventure Quest in Bali this September 2016. We are going to be spending lots of time in the wilderness of Bali, from the waterfalls to the rainforest to the canyons and volcanoes. It's just a small group of people, and this is a similar experience to a Native American vision quest, but we won't be doing a full 4 days of fasting. We'll have an option of a day of silence and fasting. And the point of this trip is to set ourselves up for dramatic realizations and spend time in nature reconnecting with who we are as people. So I'd love for you to join me. Head over to derekloudermilk.com/adventurequest to learn more and sign up. And if you want, we can even get in touch and have a quick conversation about it if you want to know more of the details. I'm keeping it intentionally vague so that it will be more adventurous as well. All right, let's talk about today. Today on the podcast, we have my good friend and roommate in Bali, Nik Wood, creator of Life Athletics. Nik has this coaching program that we've been calling the Level Up program, and I've been through it myself. A lot of people we know have gone through it, and so he's on the show today to take us through the beginning part of this process. And some of the key components that we'll hear on the show are things like treating our goals like a game, and so that we can have a lot more fun with them, and how to manage our state or experience. And one of the things that I took away from Nik's coaching program was connecting with a way of being that leads us to take actions that are the right action for us every time, rather than just having a list of actions. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. It's probably give you great insight into how you might choose to work on some specific area in your life, whether it's earning money or having more fun or making friends or your relationships or your health. Whatever it is, you can apply this process that Nik takes us through. So here is my good friend, Nik Wood. Welcome back to the Art of Adventure, and this is a special episode recorded live at the Abode of Awesome, which is where my guest and I reside here in Bali. My guest is Nik Wood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And to our dining table.
Yep. Welcome to our living room. Nik is stepped out of his hammock for an hour so I can record this with him. So Nik also hosts a podcast, and it's part of his whole business structure, which is called Life Athletics. And he's been running 100 episodes, or how many episodes do you have at this point?
Right now, there's 100 that have been published. By the time this airs, this episode that
because we're coming to you from the past.
Right. There'll be a few more than 100.
All right. So yeah, we're about the same. Actually was Nik's first interview. And the story behind how Nik and I met is interesting. He was staying at a villa next to my villa, and my ex-wife, Mary, had just left Bali, and then there was this holiday in Bali called Silent Day, where you can't leave your house and you have to just basically stay indoors. No one's allowed outside. And so Nik and I and a couple other friends spent the whole day cooped up in our villa complex together, playing games and cooking and hanging out by the pool. And Nik stepped up and was really supportive in those early days when I was struggling with the separation from my ex. And basically since then, we've been doing the exact same thing. No, we've both been podcasting, helping each other out, being roommates, working on our entrepreneurial ventures. So this is a really special episode because it's the only time I've been able to really interview one of my best friends on the show. And yeah, so maybe I'll let you just briefly tell your side of like our friendship.
Well, I mean, first, I'm honored to be on the show. We've been friends for just over a year. And as you said, you were the first person on my podcast. I'd come to Bali to do a retreat that was business focused to kind of help me launch the podcast. And in the end, it was you just saying, hey, that's easy. Let me do it. And volunteering to be the first person on that really broke the ice and made it easy for me. And so we both have our own versions of that person was there when I needed them. And so there's a lot of loyalty that's poured out of me towards you, because when I needed someone to sort of hold my hand through that first episode, because it's nerve-wracking to put your voice out in the world and wonder how it's going to be received, you did. So 100 episodes later, I'm able to look back and it does feel easy now, but it didn't then. And so that's my first memory of you being there for you during your tough time. That was easy for me. That's kind of what I do. So yeah, it's nice both ways.
That just goes to show a little investment early in a friendship can really accelerate. Everything in this island seems to be accelerated to some degree or another, including friendships. And so it's been cool. We've already been talking for a while. I interviewed Nik on his own podcast, episode 50.
Yeah. So you were the first person that I interviewed, which was episode 2. I sort of oddly numbered these. There was an intro episode. You were the first interviewee, and then I wanted to be interviewed for episode 50. People were wondering what my answers to certain questions would be, and so brought you in as guest host.
Yeah, so if you want to find out, that's a lot about Nik. So that let's consider that to be part 1 of this episode. So quickly take an hour and a half and go listen to that, and then come back and listen to the rest of this episode. That's some really good information about Nik himself. And then this episode will be a little bit more about life athletics and the process that you help people with, which is your life athletics level up coaching process that I've been through and a lot of other of our friends have been through. And
people around the world. I mean, it's been a blast doing these. Yeah, we'll talk about it in detail. But
so I've heard you say before that life athletics has been around in various forms for a while.
Yeah.
But what is the history of life athletics?
So it's interesting. I recently was asked to do a talk, and I ended up kind of telling my story, my own story and the story of life athletics, and realized that I hadn't really told it much. But basically, I was someone who grew up wanting to be more athletic than I was. I played sports with friends, but not a lot of organized sports. I had a few things that it sort of slowed me down. I was born with a concave chest, and breathing was tough. And so it wasn't until my 20s, when I sort of moved out of the house and could take care of myself a little bit, that I started getting a lot more physical. I started playing basketball at a slightly higher level and challenging myself in the gym and really reinventing myself at that point. And so learning those elements at a later age, it was very deliberate. And so I found myself going from someone who was kind of embarrassed physically to kind of an expert. And I remember one day I was working in a gym in Montreal, and someone who was really obviously physically out of shape came into the gym. It's the first time that I'd seen them. And they asked me a question about a body part while pointing at a different body part, and sort of sounded really confused, but just kept talking. And they talked at me for a couple minutes and then walked away. They just kind of turned on their heel and left with a big smile on their face. And they didn't get anything from me. And so I kind of blinked for a moment, stunned at this whirlwind of experience. And I asked myself, instead of just making them wrong for not getting value from me, I said, I wonder where I'm that out of shape and that closed. And I find when you ask yourself questions like that, be careful because you'll get answers. So all of a sudden, these different areas of life started just popping into my head. It's like, well, this area is really not working that well, and this area could be strengthened. And maybe because I was standing in a gym and had been so focused on getting my body to a certain level, the comparison just clicked. And so I started to see every aspect of life as trainable, the same way that you can make your biceps bigger if that's what you want. And so Life Athletics built from that. I originally wanted to turn it into a magazine about finances that I was going to call Financial Fitness, and have it be designed for people who are intelligent and yet might not have the information around finances that they would like. A little bit how Men's Health or Men's Fitness are magazines that simplify fitness. They're not trying to be too scientific. Yeah, finances was an area that I felt weak in, so that's immediately what jumped to mind. But it evolved to Life Athletics because I realized that all of life needed to be looked at as a cohesive unit as opposed to only one area.
So I know that hiring managers in companies like to hire people who have played team sports and maybe who've had leadership roles. And I've always heard like athletes are great at transitioning into real life because of all the stuff they learned in sports. But it also is not clear exactly how athletic skills such as training and doing repetitions of your skill is going to help you with all the rest of your life and relationships and finances and getting jobs and all that stuff. So do you have a way of simplifying thinking about how you can apply athletic and fitness thinking towards these other?
Sure. I mean, basically, Life Athletics is coming from this place that anything is trainable. So just to start at that place, I think is really important. I think often people go through life thinking that if they don't have a strength in a certain area, that means they're bad at that. So you hear people saying, I'm bad with money. I'm bad with relationships, as though that was the end of the story. Not, I'm currently weak in this area and it could be strengthened if I took certain steps. So when you take an athlete and apply them to another area of focus, they've trained so long at improving weaknesses that generally, this is just my guess in terms of hiring athletes as managers, they just apply the same thinking, which is if every day I push a little bit further, in time I could be great, right? I mean, you were a professional athlete as well, and I'm sure you understood that you weren't going to be great the first time you got on a bike, right? Maybe you were, but little smile popped up there. Like, well, I'm just naturally good at all things. But for most people, they're not naturally immediately excellent at things or at everything.
I mean, I think also the trap goes for people that find themselves naturally good at something.
Totally.
If they're like, well, if I was born this way, then I don't need to train.
Yeah.
To get any better since I'm already as good. I mean, I know that's...
Well, and sometimes people end up doing things they don't like to do, right? So we hear about Agassi not really loving tennis, but he was so good at it that it kind of felt like he had to do that.
Huh.
Right? And I think that's veering off a little bit, but with Life Athletics, the basic idea is that thinking from one area is applicable to thinking from another area. Habits of action. So we look at habits of thought and habits of action. So how we think and what we do, giving us who we are. And so what I found is that if I talk to someone who is good at something, it can be anything, their thinking in that area is often a lot more refined than people give them credit for. A lot of the time, we seem to think people that are good at things were just born that way. To my experience, most of these people have worked at it. They just don't trumpet the fact that they've worked at it. So we see them as finished products, and we think, wow, isn't that amazing that they're like that? I could never be like that. So part of what I'm trying to do with the Life Athletics podcast is to demystify that a little bit, to have people who are excellent in some area talk about the process of getting there, but also it's transferable. So if you are a high-level athlete and you talk about getting yourself to that level, then I think a lot of the thinking also applies to business. So I've interviewed people who were actors, athletes, writers, musicians, people who I just thought were really good parents and business people, and tried to distill what it is that has allowed them to succeed. And that's what the Life Athletics podcast is about.
So what are some of the themes that you see to be most transferable between one area to another?
I mean, not to downplay the podcast, but a lot of them are things that we've heard, but in repetition, they might land in a new way. It all takes more work than we think, right? Like, a lot of people seem to forget that it is a process, and that if we see someone who's a success, even if to our eyes they look like an overnight success, often it's not that way. This year, since releasing the podcast, people have asked me to come and speak at various different events and venues and to be interviewed, to give talks, to be on stage. And I've received a lot of pats on the back from around the world, people saying, wow, this is amazing what you're doing with Life Athletics. I've had Life Athletics going in one form or another, like you said, for 10 years. Most people don't see that. What they see is this last year where it's really starting to pick up. I think that's one takeaway, is that a lot of people have those 10,000 hours behind them. So just looking at that. They also spend time thinking about what it is that they're doing. So whether it's a high-level business person or athlete, they spend time in their craft. They treat it like it's important to them. So it's really not a surprise when we see people reach a high level, because they've applied themselves generally to that thing.
You may be familiar with the idea of deliberate practice. And so, for example, a lot of us drive cars, but we might have 10,000 hours driving, but we're not professional race car drivers. And the difference is that they're increasing the level of challenge deliberately to practice things that are going to improve their skill, versus we're just doing the same thing that we're already good at.
Yeah, so that's why they say, like, practice makes perfect, but it doesn't. It's like perfect practice makes perfect, or increased challenge.
So do you have a deliberate practice set up for what you're working on with Life Athletics right now?
Yeah, so one of the catchphrases for the podcast is, it's your life, it's your game, level up. And it's wild when you put something like that out into the world, how every person that you run into will start being like, hey, level up, level up. So this is definitely a thought that's being bounced back at me from outside. But you mentioned the program that I run, and that's essentially called Level Up. It's a Level Up sprint. It's 6 weeks. And the whole point is to look at where you are and where you want to be, and then take a step towards that. So I manage myself inside of that system so that I'm constantly looking at, where am I, pat myself on the back, and then move forward, right? And I think it's actually really important to say that. A lot of people are afraid of becoming complacent. And that's actually what I found is in the way of a lot of people's goals. They think, if I'm satisfied with my life, I will no longer have drive. And so they sacrifice being satisfied for perceived idea that being dissatisfied will motivate them, right? I think that constantly upping the challenge builds ambition. You want to get better. And the only way to want to get better is to start to acknowledge where you're winning already, to give yourself some momentum. And so I have people who work with me start to track wins in their life. So as they've identified what it is that they want to create for themselves, to start to track where they hit the mark. And what happens is they get addicted to that. So instead of saying what's wrong, what's not working, they start to see what's working. They want more of it. And I kind of want to bring that up just because it's what I bump into a lot working with people, is that fear of complacency. People are afraid of getting lazy.
To take the counterpoint to that, do we always need to be leveling up, or like what can we just like rest and be satisfied at times?
It's interesting because the short answer is yes. We can just rest and be satisfied sometimes. Because life athletics deals with so many different aspects, right? So I've broken life into a number of different areas. It's work, play, mind, body, relationships, finances, and then inner and outer game. And what I found is really important is leveling up your inner game might be allowing yourself to be satisfied. And so it checks both boxes at the same time. You're leveling up your ability to be satisfied with the moment. That makes sense? So it's not all about just better, more. And it's actually the thing that I struggle with saying this level up all the time is it sounds like this consumerist, more is better, bigger is better mentality, but that's not what it is for me. And it's not what I endeavor to communicate out to the world. So yeah, again, the short answer is, yeah, you can totally be satisfied where you are. Right? That's why I have people map out their lives and say, are you where you want to be in every area? If you are, great. But if you're not, we can do something about it.
And so when people sit down with you and they sort of map out these areas, what does that process look like?
Right. So there was a couple things here, and I created this system a number of years ago, basically because I couldn't find a system that I wanted to work with. Right? I read a bunch of books and everything was kind of pushing really hard into one direction or another, and I just kind of wanted to figure it out for myself. And so what I have people do is kind of figure it out for themselves. And so what they do is they calibrate a scale. And what I mean by that is you pick an area, right? So if you were to pick an area.
All right. So we got work, play, mind, body, relationships, finances. Well, since this is, I'll just pick work since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. So if we look at the area of work, what I have people do first, pretty much for every area, and I've had this on my website and talked about it a lot, is you calibrate the scale by finding what you think the best in the world is in that area. Not what you think your best is. But on a global scale, if someone walked through the door, you could identify them as best in the world. This doesn't have to be a real person. It can be a made-up construct.
Yeah.
Right? I often say if Michael Jordan in his prime was doing this with me, he wouldn't put himself as 10 out of 10, even though he was the best in the world. He would create some idea of an amalgam figure. So Karl Malone's post game and John Stockton's passing, and you see what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So, okay, once you get what 10 out of 10 best in the world is, that gives you a sense of what you admire, what you like. And I find that having it detached from the individual themselves, so now what is your best? Because that can feed into ego and either go really extreme or be really restrained because people limit themselves in their own thinking. So having this be outside of the individual, I find, is a workaround where it's just what do they admire, right? Which allows them to create a point on a map.
So if we were to say Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Tim Ferriss, those guys are who I pop into my head.
Right. So your 10 out of 10 might be some amalgam of the three of those guys.
Okay.
And then I'd have you write out why. So just really quickly, I mean, I pretty much know, but why do you admire these guys?
They all push the boundaries. They've all had financial success and done valuable things. They're really good at talking about what they do. Mm-hmm. They're really good at getting people on board with what they do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they all seem to be enjoying what they do. And
they seem to do it inside of they seem to do it in a way that benefits the people around them. Just from my observation, that seems to be a unifying element to them as well. And so, great. That gives me a sense of what you admire on that scale for work, mm-hmm. right? And it's important to calibrate this because for each person it's different. From there, I have a scale it's on the website that you sort of figure out where you are relative to that 10 out of 10. Once you figure out where you are, then we go the other way. So it's kind of is bouncing back and forth in the scale, right? And again, the more points we find, the clearer the path is. And this process seems to get people really able to visualize what it is that they want. And that seems to be one of the hardest elements that people face in life in general, is what do they want? Often we're reacting to something, and people often don't stop long enough to figure it out. And if they try to stop, they don't know how to figure it out. So I came up with this method, and it seems to work for people. So you figure out your 10 out of 10, you figure out where you are, and then the question is, where do you want to be? And I call this the horizon goal, right? So as far as you can see right now, standing where you are in life, if a genie tapped you on the head and said, yes, you can have it all, what would you like? And this is where people start to just play and fantasize about the life that they want. I used to call it a dream goal. That was too fantastical. The horizon, you can move towards it. But what I like about it is that as you move towards it, the horizon moves. So it's an adjusting thing, right? Life's not fixed.
The idea of gamification, you said this is where people can play. And, if you say life is like a game or a sport, because that's another one of your things that you say.
Yeah, it's like my elevator pitch.
Yeah. And if life is like a game, then we should be playing, we should be having fun. A lot of times it's not clear just how to play with things like a career or the work you do, or even envisioning, the fun that you could be having in a career.
Yeah. Well, most people think that they have to earn fun. One of the areas that we work on here is play. We work on play. And play for me is a really key one. And it's essentially recuperation, enjoyment, fulfillment. All of these things sort of boil down inside of the area of play. And what I find often is that in week 2, again, I have the 6-week program. In week 2, people will come in after doing week 1's homework and be like, it's really kind of embarrassing. I'm just realizing I'm not having any fun in my life. And this is like a realization for them. And often these people see that it's holding them back in their work, right? They're starting to resent their work because they're working so they can play, but they never get to play because they're working so much. And round they go. So we look at play. Part of that doesn't necessarily mean we have to go and change our lives and create big grand adventures. It's to just realize that we're living an adventure right now. Right? This is one of the things that I really love about the title of your show, The Art of Adventure. I see that as an ongoing thing, right? I've been an artist. I've painted, I've showed in galleries, and I've had clothing lines that were all just like big splashy artistic pieces on shirts and shorts and things. And I always felt like if you see yourself as an artist, you see art everywhere. And so if you see yourself as an adventurer, you see adventure everywhere. And so with play, I find that once people start to focus on fun and allow themselves to have fun, because again, this goes back to this idea that if I enjoy myself too much, I'll become complacent. There's some weird Protestant work ethic thing that a lot of people think they're not allowed to enjoy themselves, that they have to earn it. So once I have $10 million in the bank and everything in my life is arranged just so, then I get to have fun. It's amazing how many people that's working in the background of their mind. And what I found when I discovered that about myself was the next thought was, I will never get to the level that I want to get to if I'm not enjoying my life. And the only thing that said I couldn't enjoy my life was me. So I gave myself permission to enjoy myself.
So what's an example of a way that you've introduced play into one of these other areas?
Well, so this is where it comes down to a thing for me that I talk about a lot, which is like ways of being, right? So being playful inside of my work. So I did an interview recently in a treehouse, in a bamboo treehouse. And just being a little quirky and doing the interview there felt really fun to me. I'd never done that before, right? I took my laptop up there and the microphone and did the interview in this treehouse. view of the valley and rice fields in the distance, and it was gorgeous. So it doesn't take all that much, right? I'm still working, I'm still doing the interview, but allowing for a sense of wonder to enter into life, to stop every once in a while and recognize wins. So I said that that's something I have people do that work with me, but I do it myself. I stop often and say, this is a win. And then I realize I'm playing a game, and I'm playing a game where I'm fairly clear on how I'm keeping score. And that feels playful to me, right? Again, it's different for every person. And so what I do when I work with people is I have them figure out what it means for them. But there are similarities.
One of the things that I like that we just sort of do, like we'll be going to a party together, and you'll say, okay, what is the win for this party? And at first I was like, you don't win at a party.
Totally win the party.
But then I was like, I want to win the party.
Yeah.
So, but then you think like, okay, well, what does it mean? Like if I'm give myself a mission to maximize my fun, like what does that even look like? And just take a moment to envision what maximal fun will look like, and then you know exactly what to do when you get there.
Well, it also puts it into terms that are in your control usually, right? So what is a win? Well, a win is if I blah, 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 blah.
Meet 3 new people or something.
Sure. Yeah. But it tends to put it on you, comes from a responsible place, makes you more present. And all of these things are things that people struggle with often. And just making it a game, the side benefits are that you are more present, you're more playful, and you have more fun. It stemmed from a time when I was 19. I went and tried to get work in the film industry, and I was too young to legally drive a truck. I had no experience. It had no contacts. But I moved myself to Toronto and for 30 days knocked on doors.
My dad, the Hollywood of Canada?
Well, it's the largest city in Canada. So it doubles for New York, or at least it used to double for New York a lot. So in the summers, there were a lot of productions there, especially because the Canadian dollar's lower. So for American production companies, it's cost beneficial. And the crews all speak English and are really highly trained, so it works for American companies. So my dad was kind of coaching me through the process, and I talked to him every day after knocking on doors. And he'd say, before you knock on a door, know why you're there. Before you turn the doorknob, know why you're walking in. Know what you're asking for. Know what you want to get out of that experience. And so I've expanded on that. I found whether I'm going for dinner with a friend, whether I'm going to a party, a business meeting, just hanging out with a loved one. If I go in and say, okay, what's a win for me? Chances are I hit it. Chances are I have that experience, and usually more. But if I go in unconscious, then, which I also do often, then whatever happens, happens. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And
what do you want to get out of this podcast episode?
That's interesting. I hadn't fully thought of that. For me, it's a win to be on the show. I am really excited because for a year I've kind of thought, I'd like to be on that podcast. He's been on my podcast. So even just being here is a win, right? Beyond that, it feels like a win to talk about what I'm doing to someone else, right? So not just have it be my thing. I've kind of been avoiding the people who've asked me to be on their podcast. So I've done live talks and speaking events. But for some reason, other podcasts is like, really? What am I going to say? Not that I don't,
If you go back and listen to the first podcast where I was a guest, it was unintelligible. Like, what is this guy
What's he even talking about?
Like, there's a couple interesting stories in there, but there's no theme. Just like, what would happen if we were sitting around drinking a beer and telling a random story?
For me, it's so much easier to be the host, to sort of direct traffic. And it takes a lot of trust to put yourself into someone else's hands and just answer their questions, right? And if I'm talking and you ask a different question partway through, to just let go of what I was saying and go in that direction. and to really just give into someone else who's leading the show, literally. So for me, a win is being here, having this experience, and going through it and having a good time while doing it. And so far, so good.
All right. Excellent. You said the level up sprint that I participated in that you perfected here is 6 weeks. Why 6 weeks?
So there was a few things. One, I didn't want to get people dependent on me. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to go back into coaching, I'd coached years before, and I felt like I wasn't at the level that I wanted to be at in my own life. So even though they seemed to be enjoying me as a coach, I felt like I needed to do some more for myself. And so kind of fired all my clients and thought, I'm not coaching again. And then this year with the podcast coming out, people started saying that they wanted to work with me. And I showed someone the basic structure of what's become this program. And immediately wheels started turning and they started taking action in their lives. It's like, okay, there's something here. We haven't even done anything really, but just seeing the format, they took themselves through a couple steps and started taking things on. Anyway, it bothered me. This is just me being judgmental, honestly. It bothered me when I heard other coaches be like, I've been working with the same clients for 3 years. And I would think, why? Like, are they constantly improving? Or like, are they reliant on you? Or you now just a part of their circle? And I thought I wanted to make an impact and then let people go on their way. So 6 weeks felt like enough time to level up and have it be them. So they would know that they leveled up, that it wasn't me. Does that make sense? So there's a structure, and the structure is great, and I'm good at taking people through the structure. But whenever I do the structure, I get things, right? Even if I'm running myself through it. So the process is powerful, and I wanted anyone participating to know that it was them, not me. Because, it bothered me when coaches took too much credit. That's the honest answer.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about times in my life where I've done a big challenge. Grad school, for example, or writing a book. I'm not nearly finished with that. These things take way longer than I expect, longer than 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. So what is the difference that one person that you see someone leveling up in 6 weeks? What does that look like usually?
Sure. So one of the benefits of having it be 6 weeks as opposed to 6 months is that there's a sense of urgency. In 6 months, people would probably waste the first month. Probably. Right? Unless you really put something in place to get them going out of the gate.
What is that law? That something will take the time?
Is it Parabato's law? I forget what it is. But basically a task will take the time that you allot to it. So in 6 weeks, people have to wake up and get going. So I think that's really important. Also, it takes the pressure off of, I'm trying to change my life. The people that I look to work with, their lives are working. Things are fine. But they want them to be great. And so they're ready to level up. And sometimes some areas aren't working, and we deal with that. But overall, this isn't designed to be therapy. It's not a fix for your life. It's a level up. And 6 weeks isn't, like you said, you're not necessarily, I was going to say you're not going to finish a book, but someone finished a book inside of one of the 6 week programs that I ran. It was an ebook, but it was their first book, and they now can say that they have a book on Amazon.
Nice. So
you can get a lot more done in 6 weeks. One of the showier elements, and now this was expanded, but someone that I worked with, and was one of the first people when I started doing this again, he had been running a business for about a year and making about $3,000 a month, which barely covered the cost of his business. And when we started working together, he got something where he saw that he was in his own way. So I talked about the horizon goals. One of the steps is we put that all together, right? All the different areas of life where we've made the horizon goals. And we put it together and create an idea of what our horizon self would be. If all of those aspects were at the level that we say we wish they were at, who would we be? And then I challenge people to start being that now. And what that does is a few things. One, for people who are fairly clear and have completed things in their life, they just get going. They start to take on a level of thinking that is appropriate to the challenges that they put forward. For other people, what it does is it drags up all of the limiting beliefs of why they can't have that. And the benefit of having those limiting beliefs dragged up is they can then be dealt with really clearly. And so this guy's limiting belief was dragged up. And it wasn't even his. He adopted it from one of his first bosses. Basically, he was creating this social enterprise. And one of his first bosses kept saying, I don't know if I can swear on your show, so I'll keep the language clean. But he kept criticizing all of the other people in the industry who had these social enterprises, saying, oh, that person is just a fake. They're saying that all the money's going there, but really they're putting up a front. Right? So my friend, in creating this business that was a social enterprise, one, he wasn't advertising that it was a social enterprise. But two, he didn't want to be one of those successful people that would then be criticized. And he didn't realize that he was blocking his own success, but he was. And as soon as he got clear on the fact that being successful and being a jerk didn't go hand in hand, and that he could be successful and not be a jerk, he was off like a shot. And so after 10 weeks, it's a 6-week program, but after 10 weeks, he went from making $3,000 to $30,000 a month. He actually signed up for another round, and he went from making $30,000 a month to $250,000 a month. Now, this guy's amazing, but a lot of people are amazing. It's like, are you willing to challenge yourself and to grow? He was so ready to burst, but something was in the way that he hadn't been able to identify. And I think for a lot of people out there, it's the same thing. They're ready to go to step up to that next level, but they don't know what's holding them back. And so 6 weeks is usually enough time to rip that open, see what it is, set people in motion, and let them go. And if people hit all their goals, well, and they want to do another round, cool. Like, this guy has done that. And each time he keeps like blowing past. He hit a number of his horizon goals, which are things that feel so far into the future. Wow. And so the step that I haven't mentioned is, after picking the horizon goals, we look at target goals, which are things that are accomplishable inside of the 6-week program. And they're meant to sound challenging, but doable, right? Because you don't want to crush the spirit by taking something on that's too big. You also don't want it to be boring. But so his goals, when he set them, sounded like challenges, his target goals. But a lot of the time he would blow past those and into horizon goal territory. So we did a couple rounds.
When you talk about coming up with a way of being, like the ways of being that your horizon self would exhibit. Yeah. Do you have any exercises or practices to think about how to piece together these ways of being so that we can understand them?
Sure. So often when I've heard people talk about ways of being, it sounds really mystical for some reason. It sounded mystical and magical to me in the past. And all I mean is, if you're in a good mood, it's state management, essentially. If you're in a good mood, things tend to go a certain way in the day. If you're in a bad mood, things tend to go a different way. Yeah. So if you can start to manage how you are being out in the world, then you can start to influence, even in just like a micro level, everything that happens to you during the day. So if you take on being your horizon self, so one of the exercises that we do is we get really clear on how that would feel to have that be your present. So all these horizon goals have happened. Who are you in that moment? And I have people write about that and get to a place where they're both inspired but also embodying it. So it's just their new normal, right? A big part of this whole process that I do with people is have them let go of what has been normal for them and create a new normal. Creating that new normal allows you to be different. So all of a sudden, these things that you've only dreamed of doing in your life, well, you've now envisioned yourself having accomplished them already. So that shifts who you are in a fairly key way. And with enough of those shifts, you can then bring a different you out to life. So I actually challenge people to take on being their horizon self. And one of the practices is you ask yourself, am I being my horizon self? Yes or no? And if no, okay, cool. Go back to being your horizon self. And it's not always that easy, but it's a challenge. Right? Challenges aren't always easy.
So that would simply mean, like, if you have having a difficult discussion with your partner or you're working on a work problem or whatever it is, just thinking like, am I handling this the way my Horizon self would be doing it?
Exactly. And to take judgment away from it, just yes or no. Am I handling it the way that my Horizon self would? And if it's yes, great, keep doing it. If not, what I find is after we've done enough work to really clearly anchor into who the Horizon self is for each individual, they can tap into that pretty quickly. So just the reminder of, not being that right now, allows them to jump into that way of being again. I mean, I've talked to athletes who do this. One of the privileges that I've had in my life was to cover the best college basketball team in Canada for 2 seasons. So the Carleton University from Ottawa, the Carleton Ravens basketball team, they have just had an unprecedented level of success. They've won, and I'm going to mess it up because I've been away for a few years, but I think it's like 11 of the last 13 national championships they've won.
Wow.
It's amazing, right? The head coach took this year off as a sabbatical, and his brother ran the team, and they won the championship again. Well, one of the things is they have this clear structure in place, and one of the jobs for one of the assistant coaches is to basically get everyone's head right before the game. So before every game, this coach works with all of the team to make sure they're in a certain champion state. I don't know that they necessarily call it that, but that's what I'm calling it. And so they just go out and play. And they always play at the same level. It's astounding. They could be beating a team by 50 points. And they've been criticized for this. But essentially the coach says, look, we can't play down to the competition. It's not a switch. You either play at that level or you don't. Right? If we start messing with that, then when we need it, it won't be there. Mm-hmm. So they're constantly asking themselves, am I playing at that level? And if they're not, they get to that level.
Have you had any surprises or things you didn't expect by the way people use the program or what you're seeing among the people that you coach?
Yeah, often. It's so again, there's all these different areas that we look at, and I have people identify, after we do work in all of them, I have them identify the top 3 that we're going to focus on for the 6 weeks. Otherwise, it gets too confusing. And often I'm surprised at what people choose. I'm often also surprised that it changes. That what people are saying their goals are in weeks 1 and 2 often shift by week 3. And this wasn't necessarily something that I thought was going to happen, but now it's pretty consistent. People are often walking around with an idea of what they want in their lives that is different than what they actually want. So they think that they want to be millionaires and have all kinds of fancy things. And what happens after a couple weeks of looking at what their goals are and sort of checking in is they see that they picked up those goals from someone somewhere in life. And that what they actually want is to have a nice quiet place with a loved one and some friends around and have Sunday dinner every week. It's neat because and sometimes it's the other way. Sometimes people who are walking around with really sort of mild-mannered, small goals realize that they can live a lot bigger than they have been. And they just explode with what they reach for. And so I guess one of the main surprises is that a lot of people don't know what game they're actually playing in life. They don't know what a win is for them. And most people don't stop long enough to even identify what that is. So when I talk about life as a game, it's your game. What's in the back for me is, how are you scoring your game? So many people walking around feeling like losers for one reason or another. But when you scrape the surface, they have no idea how they're scoring their own game, right? So they're just identifying as not winning it, but they don't know what a win is.
So if you just change the rules, then you could be winning every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the resistance to that often is, well, I'll just become complacent. What often happens is that people start to feel like winners and they want to feel like winners, and they start being more accomplished.
So like I could give myself extra points for each additional gram of chocolate that I consume per day or how long I sleep in.
Well, it was your goal to put on weight a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it? So maybe the chocolate would be a win then. I mean, it all comes down to what are you up to? So once we do this work in these different areas of life to identify what the horizon goals are and the target goals, it becomes pretty clear what wins are. It's basically what is taking me closer to these goals. And essentially, what is taking me closer to being the person I want to be every day? A lot of people have resistance to this thought because they hear it as criticism. It's like, what do you mean being the person I want to be? Like, I'm me. So yeah, but there's all kinds of different versions of us that we can be. And so it's one that you're satisfied with. If you're satisfied now, great. Keep doing it. Right? I have nothing invested in making people feel bad, but a lot of people want to press forward. And those are the people that I work really well with.
Do you see a difference in people that want to press forward? Is there like any between male and female or Canadians and Americans, or do you see like types of people that really want to press forward more than others?
I think that it manifests slightly differently. I don't know that I've necessarily seen that much of a difference in terms of men and women or countries, but there are definitely types. There are people who want to impress the world, right? And so their goals tend to be a challenge to deal with because you don't want to dampen them, but you also want them to enjoy the process a little bit and ask, is this an authentic representation of you, or are you just trying to impress someone exterior to yourself? And then some people are afraid to dream. And so life isn't happening the way that they want it to, but they don't feel free to ask, even to themselves, for what they want from life. And so again, there are different groups of people, and each type has a different set of challenges. But basically getting people clear on what do you want, right? Getting clear on their answer to that question puts them in the driver's seat. So I'm not trying to motivate anyone. The motivation comes from getting people clear on what they want and then really clear on why. We spend a lot of time on people's whys.
You mentioned writing exercise for how does it feel to be your horizon self.
Yeah.
Is most of this process simply like journaling and reflecting about your why or how it feels to be your horizon self and just understanding it that way?
So the way that the process works is we meet up for 2 hours, either in person or online in some sort of group setting. I find that it works well in groups because often people are going through similar things, and seeing other people go through the same thing keeps people from getting stuck on that step. Then we, do a bunch of work. A lot of it's written. And then during the week, most of the time, it's about taking action, right? So there might be a little bit of writing. I have people record things and listen to their own recordings. So answers to certain questions, and they listen to their answers. But it's all about taking that out to your life. I win if people level up inside of 6 weeks. So it's interesting because it's about action, but it's first about being. So the work with me is really focused on making sure that their being is on point, right? That they're coming from a place that is really true to who they want to be in the world. When that's clear, their action is supercharged. And then, basically they're taking action inside of that scope.
And so could you maybe just talk about your own life experience? Like, what's a way of being that you've thought of that's led to an action in your life?
Gotcha. So even with the podcast, thinking life is trainable, which is like the fundamental concept behind life athletics, allowed me to put out the podcast before I felt completely 100% ready. Trusting that I could improve and having it be okay that we're going to level up allowed me to be okay with the level I was currently at. And so I find for me, a lot of it's inner game, because I've been in my way for a long time. So when I talk about life athletics being around for 10 years, I just didn't feel up to my own idea. And it's taken me this time to get myself to the place where I had enough confidence to put my voice out to the world, to work with people, to know that I can have an impact, and to feel authentic and real as I do all of that. And so a lot of the actions have been in giving myself permission to bring myself to life.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet that you think is important for people to know if they're going to try to think about using this process?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that I ask everyone first is, are you willing to level up? Are you ready to? A lot of people complain about their lives, but when you scratch the surface, they're really invested in things being exactly as they are. So for me, it's, are you willing to do it? You see people admiring the greats out in the world, whether it's physically or mentally, emotionally, whatever. But are you willing to put in the time? So I guess the question would be like, what's held people back the most? And it's thinking it's too hard, coming up with some reason and having that reason be more important than the benefit, right? I mean, I talk a lot about some of the things that I want to be able to do and I can't. But when I challenge myself, I can't do them because I haven't made them important enough to me. So I want to play the guitar. I bought a guitar before I left Canada, but I've been wandering for 6 years. It's been a long time since I picked up a guitar. Talk about handstands. And I mean, I made improvements, but I still can't kick into a handstand comfortably. I've done it once or twice. And then the question is like, well, are you training? Sort of. And that's the answer you get from most people who are having a like sort of inspiring and good enough life. Is they're sort of doing the things that will get them to where they want to be. And so, I mean, I guess I'm rewriting it to a question for listeners, but I mean, if leveling up inspires you, whether you work with me or not, is like, are you willing to actually level up? Are you willing to let go of your normal and step forward? And that's scarier for most people than most people want to admit. So I've basically talked a number of people out of working with me because it just became clear, like, they've been paying lip service to it. And when they realize that for themselves, they kind of go off and think for a while. And some people come back and work with me when they're ready, and some people do something else.
In bicycle racing in the States,
yeah,
they have categories starting with 5 as beginners, 4, 3, 2, 1 pro. And at one point you jump from a level 3 to racing with Cat 1s and pros. And the first race I did was way, way harder than I was expecting because it's the biggest jump. And the first thing I thought was, I am not ready for this.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, I can just go back to the level I was and win consistently because this is challenging.
One of the metaphors that I use for leveling up, it's kind of visual, but I picture things in chunks, right? So if you picture maybe a high-rise building that you can float through the floors. I don't know where that actually exists. Playing some video game, you're a ghost, whatever. But basically, as you get to the top of one level, you feel pretty good about yourself. You push into the bottom of the next level, you're at the bottom of the next level. It's hard again. You put more weight on the bar for a bench press, you feel it. But that's where growth happens. And so while you can feel like you're not as good, you've grown, you've leveled up. And I mean, I know from your story, you pushed forward, right? You allowed yourself to be at the bottom of that level long enough to actually move up. And it's a huge challenge. Not everyone is willing to put themselves through that discomfort, to suck for a while at the bottom of the next level, realizing that in absolute terms, they've improved, even though their experience is being bad at something again. Most people don't want to feel bad at anything.
Yeah. Well, this is really good. I hope that, so my intention was that people could get an understanding of this process, and then if they wanted to try it, be able to go and envision, because the most valuable thing I got from going through this process was walking out my door in the morning and saying, okay, I'm going to be, my horizon self was a combination of Indiana Jones and Robin Williams, among other people. But I was like, I'm going to go live until I forget as Indiana Jones and all this stuff. And so it's cool. Just like the fact of stepping out my door reminding me that. So that was my goal for this interview. And I think we got there.
Awesome.
So I've got 2 final questions that I ask all of my guests.
Perfect.
The first is, if you could change or add something to the world, what would you want the world to have?
Whew. So I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. It really struck me recently that as a species, we seem pretty rudderless. We don't really have a unified goal as human beings. We don't have anything that we're up to in general other than kind of existing. And even that, we seem to be doing our best to wreck that. So I was realizing, like, what would I do if I had billions of dollars? Well, I'd put people together to identify some global goals and to set out having people systematically level up. So I believe that solutions to most of the world's problems have been found, at least a lot of the basic ones.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we all hear the stats about people dying of malaria, but no one needs to die of malaria, right? So if we set it as a human species goal that the things we know how to deal with will be dealt with, that'd be huge. So for me, if I could add something to the world, it'd be that basic concept of let's do what we know how to do, right? As a species, let's make that important and really identify who we want to be as a species and move forward.
Wow.
So yeah.
I've never thought about it like that.
Most people haven't. And it's something that I haven't started talking about on my podcast yet, but it's going to be a section on it. Because it really inspires me. It actually hit me watching some random YouTube videos, and an ad came on for a documentary on the guy that started 5 Hour Energy. And he started talking, saying, hey, I made this product in 15 days, and it made me a multi-billionaire. My needs are totally met. My family's needs are totally met. Well, now what do I do with all this money? And so he created some foundation where he brought a bunch of engineers together to deal with some issues. And the first thing that came to my mind was maybe don't make a whole bunch of little plastic bottles that are single serving. Since I deal with
gallons of 5 Hour Energy.
I deal with cleaning up trash in the jungles in Bali on a regular basis. But yeah, that concept came and said, well, what would I do if I had billions of dollars? Well, this is what I would do. Technology in terms of like faster cars, faster computers, that stuff is cool. Not my main focus. The technology of human interrelatedness fascinates me. And so I think that's the biggest challenge for people is how can we live together to our highest level? So global goals, if we're all in this together, what does that actually look like and what would we do?
That's super cool. All right. We're just going to give first ever podcast homework because this is fascinating for everyone to think about what a good global goal was or what global goal you would pick for us because there's a lot to choose from. Fascinating. Final question is, what's your definition of adventure?
My definition of adventure. I mean, I don't know that I can find a dictionary definition, but for me, it's something that makes me feel excited, alive, enthusiastic, and gleeful. So it can be simply like going to the supermarket in Montreal, and I used to get like these really cool picnics and ride to the park and meet up with friends, and just I would turn that into a little adventure. Just living life inside of a sense of wonder. Sometimes we search for it. We go on massive hikes and expeditions to have that sense of wonder. But I think we can also bring that into every day. Again, it's one of the things that inspires me about your title, The Art of Adventure. It's about being an everyday adventurer. And how can every day be exciting, make you feel alive, see something from a new perspective?
Excellent. It's a perfect segue into a plug for my latest adventure. Every day is an adventure. Come to Bali and go on an adventure with me. It's called Adventure Quest. You'll hear more about that later. But Nick, where can people find you online?
They can find me at lifeathletics.com, on Stitcher and iTunes. Life Athletics podcast, just Life Athletics, and Facebook, Life Athletics, Twitter, Life Athletics. I can keep going.
All right.
Instagram.
Well, really appreciate you going through this process on the show, breaking it down, giving us good examples. And I know a lot of people personally who have, benefited from using this process. And so I salute you for what you're up to.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
All right. We're still sitting in our living room, so I can't tell you goodbye, but this is the end of the podcast. Signing off. All right. Great episode. Thanks for joining Nick and I on this episode. There was lots of great tidbits in this episode, and I get to experience these discussions with Nick all the time because we're roommates, but it's really cool to be able to broadcast these out to the world. Some of the things that stuck with me off the top of my head are, just what it feels like to move up a level. It's going to be hard. Thinking about where your motivation comes from, internal or external motivation, and then looking at the length and achievability of goals and how long or short-term goals should be, how much you can progress in 6 weeks, and staring reality right in the face. Nick, as always, is full of great quotable quotes, so make sure to check out the show notes, and you'll be able to tweet any of your favorite quotes from this episode. If you want to leave some feedback for the show, for Nick or myself, the best way to do that is through an iTunes review. That helps the show stay up in the rankings. You can simply go to iTunes and leave a review, what you liked about the show, what you learned, and I will love you forever. Thanks so much for listening today. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.